My water bill was $1,237.89. I live alone in a modest two-bedroom house with a cactus in the front yard and a dog that's terrified of water. No pool, no sprinklers, no fish tanks, and definitely no underground moat. I stared at the bill like it was written in an alien language. For comparison, my usual bill hovered around $50. I thought maybe the water company had made a clerical error, or maybe they had confused me with someone running a water park out of their basement. But when I called them, they double-checked and said, "Sir, according to our records, you've used over 990,000 gallons in 30 days. That's enough to flood a tennis court knee-deep." And that's when I knew I wasn't just being billed, I was being robbed. Someone, somewhere, was siphoning my water like it was free soda at a movie theater refill station, and I had no clue who yet. At first, I suspected a leak. Maybe an underground pipe burst and was silently draining into the soil. So I brought in a plumber friend to check the whole line. He scoped the pipes, thermal imaged the lawn, and tapped around like he was hunting treasure. Nothing. Everything on my property checked out, but the meter kept ticking slowly, consistently. Water was flowing, just not to me. That's when we noticed something strange. A patch of suspiciously green grass on the other side of my fence. It wasn't just green, it was practically glowing. This was during a drought, mind you, when most lawns looked like toasted cornflakes. But Brenda's, it looked like she had a private rainforest. Brenda was my next-door neighbor and the self-appointed queen of our HOA. She had the voice of a chain-smoking parrot and the ego of a Bond villain, always berating people about weeds in their garden, trash bins not being pulled in on time, and heaven forbid you install solar panels without submitting a 97-page proposal. Her lawn had always been pristine, but now it looked like it had been kissed by the gods. Something didn't add up. When I brought it up casually during a fake friendly driveway chat, she waved her hand and chuckled. "Oh, I just have a natural water source on my land. A little miracle spring. You wouldn't understand, city boy." That was rich coming from someone who once fined a neighbor for painting their mailbox eggshell white instead of HOA-approved Arctic ivory. I decided to investigate further. That night, flashlight in hand, and wearing a hoodie like I was planning a heist, I crept along my property line. My dog, Biscuit, followed me, tail tucked like he knew we were about to uncover something unholy. And there it was, behind a loose panel in the fence, buried under some fake rocks and decorative mulch, a PVC pipe. New, clean, suspicious. It ran from my main water line, through a hole in the fence, and straight into Brenda's side yard. It was surgical, like it had been done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I checked my water meter, and sure enough, the numbers were spinning as her sprinklers hissed to life. My brain short-circuited. She was stealing my water. Not just a little, a Niagara-level theft. And the worst part? She'd been doing it long enough to ruin me financially. I recorded a video right then and there. The meter, the pipe, the connection point, everything. The rage boiling in my chest was only matched by the absurdity of the situation. I was being robbed by a woman who once reported me for putting up Halloween decorations on September 30th. Brenda wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a literal water thief. I confronted her the next morning, hoping naively that shame or guilt might have a sliver of effect. She didn't even flinch. She stood there in her leopard print bathrobe, clutching a mug that said Queen of the HOA, and sneered, "You can't prove anything. And even if you could, it's your word against mine." She shut the door in my face. That's when I realized two things. First, Brenda had no intention of apologizing or stopping. Second, she had no idea who she was messing with. Because while I may not be a fighter, I'm a problem solver, a thinker, a planner. And now I had the motive, the means, and oh baby, did I have the creativity. I didn't go to the police, not yet. That would have been too simple, too easy. Brenda had declared war, and I intended to fight back in the most poetic, ridiculous, and comic way possible. I wasn't just going to make her stop. I was going to make her regret ever laying a finger or wrench on my pipes. So I sat down at my desk, opened a blank page, and typed in big, bold letters, Operation Tie-Dye. If she wanted to flood her lawn with stolen water, then I'd make sure the next time those sprinklers turned on, she'd be spraying a masterpiece worthy of Van Gogh, but one even the HOA wouldn't approve of. And I wasn't alone. I had some help in mind, a retired prankster uncle, a chemist friend who made his own soap, and an old irrigation system that was about to become the centerpiece of my revenge. By the time I was done, Brenda's perfectly manicured lawn wouldn't just be ruined. it would be legendary. Her green paradise was about to become a rainbow explosion. But first, I needed to rewire her connection and lay the groundwork for the most spectacular, non-toxic, HOA-friendly disaster this neighborhood had ever seen. Because if you're going to war with a Brenda, you don't just fight, you paint. Brenda didn't just steal my water. She stole my patience, my peace of mind. And by the time I got through with her, she'd regret ever meeting a guy with a YouTube degree in plumbing and a PhD in pettiness. After uncovering the hidden pipe and getting stonewalled by her leopard-robed arrogance, I had to decide, go the lawful route and trust the system, or take the scenic route and make a stop at the corner of chaos and justice. I chose the scenic route, but first, I had to try one last time to handle it the mature way because apparently, I still believed in decency. So I put on my most respectable flannel, baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies, and walked over to her house with a fake smile and a GoPro in my pocket. She opened the door, took one look at me and the cookies, and squinted like I'd brought her a live grenade. I offered them calmly, brought up the situation, and even hinted that I was willing to let it slide if she just removed the illegal pipe and paid back the water bill. Her response? She snatched the cookies, took a bite like a villain in a soap opera, and said, "Unless you've got a warrant or a badge, I don't have time for nonsense." Then she slammed the door so hard it rattled the decorative gnome on her porch. I stood there for a moment, stunned, watching crumbs fall from her mouth through the window as she laughed at something on her phone. I think it was a cat video or possibly a clip of someone else's misery. Either way, it was clear she thought she'd won. So, I installed cameras. 4 of them. One disguised as a birdhouse, one in a fake rock, one behind my barbecue grill, and one peeking through a knothole in the fence. Within 48 hours, I had footage that would make a documentary filmmaker cry with joy. Brenda wasn't just watering her lawn. She was living in a stolen water fantasy land. Midnight bubble baths for her poodles, filling an above-ground pool for her nieces, running a slip-and-slide for her yoga club, which was actually just 4 women in neon leggings drinking wine coolers. One clip showed her hosing down her driveway for 10 minutes straight while singing along to a playlist called Brenda's Hot Girl Summer. At this point, I had more than enough evidence, so I marched into the water company's office like I was about to blow the lid off a corruption scandal. The clerk was polite, but ultimately unhelpful. They said since the line was technically on private property, it was a civil matter. I'd need a lawyer or a court order to do anything about it. I tried the police next. The officer at the front desk blinked slowly while chewing gum, then muttered, "A water theft case? In this economy?" before handing me a form that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1994. I even contacted the HOA, but when I mentioned Brenda's name, the president coughed into his hand and said, "Yeah, that's above my pay grade." She was on the board, after all. She practically was the HOA. The system wasn't broken. It had been compromised by Brenda. And then came the final insult. At the neighborhood barbecue, hosted 2 houses down, I tried to enjoy a quiet burger and keep my rage under wraps. Brenda strutted over in a floral sundress, holding a margarita the size of my dog, and made a show of inspecting my rain barrel system loudly in front of everyone. She said, "Oh, bless his heart. He's still using those silly little buckets like a pioneer. Don't worry, sweetie. Some of us just have better resources." Then she laughed, tossed a bag of dog poop into my barrel, and walked off like she just dropped the mic on a rap battle. People around me pretended not to notice, but I saw their smirks. That was it. The straw that broke the hose. The moment my inner prankster was born. I went home and sat in silence for an hour, Biscuit curled up beside me, confused but supportive. Then I started making calls. My uncle Rick, a retired engineer and legendary prankster back in his day, picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. He was in. My friend Leo, who worked in a chemical supply shop and once created a shampoo that turned his roommate's hair green for a week, offered to help with the science. We met in my garage that weekend. 3 men, 1 dog, and a mission to make Brenda's lawn pay for its crimes in the most unforgettable way possible. The idea was simple but glorious. We'd reroute the illegal pipe Brenda had installed and connect it to a delivery system loaded with non-toxic, biodegradable, environmentally safe dye packets. They'd dissolve the moment her sprinklers activated, soaking her lawn in a swirl of psychedelic colors. Neon blue, flamingo pink, radioactive orange. Colors so loud, even blind squirrels would stop and stare. And we timed it perfectly. The annual HOA garden tour was just days away, and Brenda's lawn was the crown jewel of the event. She was even scheduled to give a short speech titled, "The Secret to My Lush Lawn." Oh, we'd give her a secret, all right. But first, I had to reroute the line. It had to be clean, invisible, and reversible, because as much as I wanted revenge, I wasn't looking for jail time. So, under the cover of darkness, armed with tools, zip ties, and my uncle's vintage miner's lamp, we got to work. We disconnected her pipe from the main line and reattached it to our custom reservoir, a tank filled with dyed water carefully mixed and balanced to create the perfect chaos blend. We even added a slow-release timer that would delay the effect until the exact moment the sprinklers reached full pressure. When it was done, we sealed everything up, buried the evidence, and double-checked the camera angles. All that was left to do was wait for the show to begin. Every minute that passed felt like a drum roll. Every time I walked past my fence, I could feel the anticipation building. Brenda kept strutting around her yard, completely unaware that her pride and joy was about to become a canvas for the messiest, most magnificent artwork HOA history had ever seen. I wasn't just fighting back, I was rewriting the rules. Because when someone steals your water, your time, your peace, you don't just get even, you get creative. And I had just finished the masterpiece of my suburban life. The morning of the HOA garden tour arrived with the kind of chirpy optimism only suburban weekends could muster. Birds were singing, neighbors were smiling, and Brenda was out front adjusting the angle of her lawn flamingos like she was curating an art museum. She wore a wide sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and a pastel cardigan draped over her shoulders like she was about to sell expensive perfume to the homeowners. Everything about her screamed smug satisfaction. I watched from my window, sipping my coffee like it was a countdown clock. The dye reservoir was full, the rerouted pipe was primed, the hidden cameras were all rolling. Today wasn't just the day of the tour, it was the unveiling of my masterpiece. Operation Tie-Dye was go. But let me back up a bit. Setting the prank in motion took more than just dumping a few gallons of colored water into a tank. We had to get the chemistry just right. Too weak, and the colors wouldn't show. Too strong, and we risked staining not just the grass but the sidewalk, the mailbox, and possibly the HOA president's new linen pants. Leo, our resident chemist, came through with a cocktail of natural dyes. Beetroot extract for the reds, spirulina for the greens, turmeric for yellows, and a special blend he refused to name for the electric blues and purples. "It's safe," he said, "and if anything, it'll make her lawn smell faintly of gingerbread." Not a downside, in my opinion. Once the dye was mixed, we filled the tank in my garage and tested the pump system. The rerouted pipe was connected to Brenda's own sprinkler system, which we'd accessed through the back corner where her dog had dug a convenient hole last summer. A little PVC magic, a one-way valve, and a modified pressure trigger meant that the moment her sprinkler system kicked in, our dye mix would flood through her network. She'd water her lawn like usual, and in doing so, she'd unleash suburban chaos. The HOA garden tour began promptly at 10 a.m., as advertised in the emails no one read. A few dozen neighbors strolled down the sidewalks with coffee cups and awkward smiles, nodding at flower beds and whispering about fertilizer choices. Brenda, of course, was stop number 5 on the official tour map. She stood at the end of her driveway, holding a clipboard and greeting everyone like the mayor of a town with one stoplight and too much time. I could see the glint in her eye as she prepared to brag about her natural water source and the nutrient-rich soil secrets passed down through generations, which I knew was code for, "I stole my neighbor's water and dare him to do something about it." 10:02. The first sprinkler head popped up in her front yard. There was a hiss, a pause, and then a gentle burst of water arched across her rose bushes. People clapped politely. Brenda beamed. Then the second zone kicked in. That's when the magic began. A soft pink mist sprayed across her prized lawn gnome collection. A bright blue arc shot over the driveway and splashed onto the sidewalk. Then came the purples and oranges, swirling together in midair before soaking into the thirsty grass. At first, no one reacted. It was subtle, pretty even. But within 30 seconds, it looked like Willy Wonka had vomited across her front yard. Brenda's smile faltered. She looked down at her shoes, now speckled with neon green dots. Her flamingos were dripping with purple streaks. The bushes looked like they'd been tie-dyed at summer camp. One of the neighbors gasped. Another pulled out their phone. A kid screamed, "Cool," and ran across the lawn, leaving rainbow footprints behind him. Brenda's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she tried to shut off the system from her control panel near the garage. Too late. The final sprinkler zone exploded in a spiral of color, sending a spinning burst of orange and blue water into the sky that rained down like confetti. I recorded it all from my upstairs window, trying not to laugh loud enough to give myself away. Brenda, now fully panic-activated, grabbed her hose and tried to spray the color away, but all she did was smear it into streaks. Her white sandals were ruined, her sun hat was polka-dotted, and her clipboard now resembled a watercolor disaster. She shrieked something about sabotage and chemical warfare. Meanwhile, the HOA president, Mr. Jacobs, a man who once fined me for leaving my Christmas lights up until January 4th, stood frozen on her driveway. His khaki pants now boasted a massive purple splotch across the thigh. He did not look amused. Neighbors gathered, phones out, narrating like they were filming a nature documentary. Brenda slipped on the wet grass and fell backward into her hydrangeas with a dramatic flail that would have earned applause in a high school play. No one rushed to help her. She got up, dripping and screaming, pointing at everyone and no one, blaming jealous neighbors, faulty sprinkler companies, and mysterious hackers. She shouted my name once, but I was already halfway through editing the footage with a dramatic orchestral soundtrack. Within minutes, the videos hit the local Facebook group. Brenda's rainbow meltdown became the fastest-liked post in HOA history. Someone added slow motion to her fall. Another made a remix of her scream, auto-tuned to a beat drop. By the time I checked Twitter, it had already spread beyond the neighborhood. A local news station even messaged asking for permission to air the footage on their segment called Suburbia Gone Wild. Brenda stormed into her house and didn't come out for hours. The garden tour awkwardly moved on to the next house, but the buzz lingered. No one remembered the daisies or koi ponds or topiary giraffes. All anyone talked about was the neon explosion on Brenda's lawn and how spectacularly it had backfired. I had pulled off the perfect revenge. No damage, no harm, just a very public reminder that actions have consequences, especially when you mess with a guy who owns a GoPro and has a friend who makes soap that can temporarily dye tree bark. Later that afternoon, a few neighbors stopped by, not to chastise me, but to quietly congratulate me. One brought cookies. Another offered to mow my lawn for free. Apparently, I had become something of a folk hero. Even Mr. Jacobs, after changing his pants, sent a message through the community app. While the HOA does not condone pranks, we are currently reviewing board member conduct and will issue a statement soon. Translation: Brenda was in trouble. As for Brenda's lawn, well, the dye didn't fade for days. Even then, the grass held on to a stubborn pastel tint, especially under direct sunlight. Her once perfect green carpet now resembled a field painted by a group of blindfolded toddlers on a sugar high. And somehow, I wasn't even done yet, because now Brenda was going to try to fight back, and I already had my next move ready. The prank war was just getting started. Brenda reappeared from her house like a villain rising from the ashes of a colorful defeat. Gone were the pastels and pearls. Now she was dressed in full legal battle mode. Black slacks, a blazer with shoulder pads sharp enough to slice drywall, and sunglasses bigger than her forehead. She stormed across her lawn, which was still a blotchy rainbow of fading dyes, leaving behind a trail of pink footprints and fury. Her phone was already in hand, the screen glowing with either a lawyer's number or her own live stream. I couldn't tell which, but I knew something was coming. Brenda was the type of person who didn't just lose. She declared war on the scoreboard itself. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she planned. At precisely 5:47 p.m., a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. One officer stepped out, a tall guy with mirrored shades and the weary expression of someone who'd been summoned to break up HOA slap fights one too many times. I greeted him with my friendliest, most innocent homeowner face, already holding a folder of evidence thicker than a school textbook. He introduced himself politely and explained that Brenda had filed a complaint claiming I had willfully engaged in sabotage, property defacement, and possibly eco-terrorism. I choked back a laugh. Eco-terrorism? Because her lawn looked like an Easter egg hunt exploded? The officer was surprisingly calm and even slightly amused. I handed over the surveillance footage of her illegal pipe, the documentation of my water bills, and a printed statement I had prepared that detailed every step of my revenge, carefully leaving out any words like plot, operation, or payback. Instead, I framed it as a homeowner's creative and harmless reaction to months of water theft, supported with visual evidence and a non-toxic dye composition report that Leo had prepared like a science fair project. After a quiet moment reviewing it all, the officer gave me a small nod and said, "Honestly, this is one of the more entertaining cases I've dealt with. Looks like you handled it cleaner than most folks would." Brenda, of course, didn't take that well. She emerged from her front door, practically spitting fire, demanding to speak to the officer. She pointed at her lawn, then at me, then at her now permanently stained flamingos. She called me a criminal, a lunatic, and a hydro-hacker. The officer raised a hand and calmly explained that from the evidence presented, it appeared she had been illegally siphoning water from my property for months. He mentioned utility tampering laws. He even used the word felony. That was the moment everything changed. Brenda's yelling stopped mid-sentence, like someone had hit the mute button. Her mouth stayed open, eyes wide, lips twitching. You could practically see the realization hit her like a water balloon to the face. She tried to recover, of course, claimed she didn't know the pipe was connected to my main line, said a contractor had told her it was city water access, blamed her ex-husband, blamed Google, blamed confusing plumbing layouts. But none of it stuck. The officer handed her a citation for utility theft and told her she might be hearing from both the city and the water company, especially since this qualified as unauthorized usage of municipal resources. Brenda swore up and down that she was going to sue me, the HOA, the officer, the universe. Then she tripped on her own driveway hose and face-planted right in a puddle of purple. Later that evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. Group chats lit up. The Facebook post of Brenda's sprinkler meltdown had now been picked up by a meme account with 2 million followers. Someone dubbed her scream into a techno remix. Another person edited footage of her slipping to sync perfectly with a cymbal crash. I was getting texts from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. My mailbox had an anonymous gift inside, a framed photo of Brenda mid-fall with the caption, "Taste the rainbow." But while the digital world was having a party, the HOA was not. A surprise emergency board meeting was scheduled for the next day, held in the community center, which had never seen this much excitement since the bake sale brawl of 2018. I showed up with Uncle Rick and Leo for moral support, though we had to sit in the back. Brenda, still blotchy from the lawn dye, sat at the head table like a deflated prom queen. She tried to control the narrative, claimed she was the victim of neighbor harassment and that I had jeopardized her property value. But then Mr. Jacobs, the HOA president, stood up with a folder that looked suspiciously familiar. My folder. He'd reviewed everything. The footage, the pipe, the water bills. He calmly laid it all out, concluding with a dry, official-sounding statement that misappropriation of neighbor utilities constitutes grounds for board suspension pending further review. Brenda's jaw hit the table. She tried to protest, but he overrode her with a vote. The motion passed, her title suspended, her HOA power gone. Her look of betrayal was priceless. I sat in the back, arms crossed, as quiet clapping spread through the room. That night, Brenda went live on TikTok, crying into her phone and ranting about being persecuted. She claimed her grass had PTSD, her dog refused to look at her, and that she was being targeted for her leadership qualities. The comments roasted her into oblivion. One guy said her lawn looked like it had been sneezed on by a unicorn. Another asked if her flamingos were attending Coachella. I didn't comment, but I watched over and over with popcorn. The next morning, a city utility truck showed up at her house. They marked the illegal pipe, issued her an official notice, and began the process of dismantling it. Brenda tried to argue, then tried to flirt, then just stood on the sidewalk silently as her stolen water lifeline was ripped out of the earth. I watched from my porch with Biscuit, sipping coffee like a satisfied villain in the last scene of a movie. As the sun went down, I realized something funny. I hadn't planned on becoming the neighborhood's unlikely hero. I didn't set out to make headlines or memes or dethrone an HOA tyrant. All I'd wanted was for someone to stop stealing my water. But somehow, in defending my lawn, I triggered a series of events that ended with Brenda covered in dye, stripped of power, and humiliated in the most colorful way imaginable. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been sprayed in Technicolor across the suburban battlefield. And even though the war was over, I had the sneaking suspicion Brenda wasn't done just yet. But then again, neither was I. The courtroom smelled like cheap pine cleaner and stale drama. I sat on one side of the small claims court with a briefcase full of evidence, my friend Leo beside me looking like a smug chemistry professor, and Uncle Rick flipping through a notepad filled with doodles of Brenda falling into flower beds. Across the aisle sat Brenda, dressed in all gray, her face carefully neutral, but her foot tapping uncontrollably. She had replaced the oversized sunglasses with a stack of folders labeled things like character assassination and emotional distress. She also had an attorney, a man who looked more like a tax accountant than a legal bulldog. I wasn't nervous, not because I'm fearless, but because I knew this wasn't just a legal showdown. It was the final act of a suburban opera, and I had written the script. The judge walked in, a woman with glasses perched at the edge of her nose, and the vibe of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. She asked for opening remarks, and Brenda's lawyer stood up and launched into a passionate monologue about defamation, humiliation, malicious intent, and lawn trauma. He painted Brenda as a victim of an elaborate, calculated act meant to ruin her reputation and cause irreparable harm to her mental health and horticultural pride. Brenda sniffled at all the right moments, even dabbed her eye with a tissue. If I hadn't known she once faked a knee injury to get out of paying a parking ticket, I might have believed it. Then it was my turn. I stood, nodded to the judge, and said as calmly as possible that everything I had done was in response to ongoing, documented theft of my water. I laid out the video footage of her illegal pipe connection, presented my water bills which had quadrupled since the day she started siphoning, and even showed the timestamps that matched her sprinkler activity with my meter readings. Leo stepped up and explained the science behind the dye. Non-toxic, biodegradable, completely harmless to soil or pets. Uncle Rick added his part, dramatically pulling out a printed still of Brenda hosing down her driveway at 3 o'clock in the morning while drinking boxed wine. The judge barely blinked as she flipped through the folder. She stopped at the surveillance screenshots, looked at the water usage charts, and let out a long, long sigh. Then she turned to Brenda. "Did you have a permit for this secondary water line?" Brenda stammered, then blamed the contractor again. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a copy of the contract or name of the contractor?" Brenda glanced at her lawyer, then muttered something about misplaced documents. The room got quiet. The tapping of her foot got louder. After a pause, the judge ruled. Brenda was found liable for the unauthorized water use and ordered to pay restitution for the excessive bills I had incurred. She was also fined for tampering with utility lines and issued a court order to stay at least 15 feet away from my property unless formally invited. The best part? She was ordered to cover all legal fees, including the cost of the dye, which Leo had priced at exactly $68.37. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words but couldn't decide on a language. Her lawyer packed up his folders in record time and was out the door before she could even ask for an appeal. Outside the courthouse, the neighborhood was waiting, not physically, but digitally. Word had spread. The Facebook group had been tracking the trial like it was a true crime podcast. Someone made a live thread complete with GIFs. When I posted a photo of the judge's ruling, the comments section lit up. Brenda, once the feared queen of the HOA, was now the running joke of every yard-related meme in town. Even the HOA newsletter, usually boring enough to cure insomnia, had a cartoon of a flamingo holding a water hose and looking confused. A week later, I received a formal offer from the HOA to join the board. Apparently, Brenda's seat had been vacated due to code of conduct violations, and I was considered a suitable replacement. I declined politely but firmly. I told them I preferred my freedom and, frankly, I didn't want to be in charge of regulating mailbox paint colors or fighting over holiday inflatables. Instead, I used the opportunity to suggest a new rule. Any future accusations of utility tampering should be taken seriously and investigated promptly. They agreed and even named it the Brenda Clause. Brenda, meanwhile, was quieter than I'd ever seen her. She stopped hosting yoga slip-and-slide parties. Her driveway remained stained with faint streaks of purple. Her front lawn, though no longer tie-dyed, never quite returned to its original color. It stayed a pale, uneven green, like it had been drained of confidence. The flamingos were gone, replaced by a single sad lawn gnome holding an umbrella. I saw her one afternoon dragging a bag of artificial turf across her yard, a resigned slump in her shoulders. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then came the final twist. It was the middle of July, peak heatwave season, the kind of day when sidewalks cook eggs and car interiors turn into lava pits. I saw a truck parked in front of Brenda's house with bold letters that read, "Easy Turf and Lawn." She was finally replacing her ruined grass with fake stuff. It was an understandable move, but 2 days later, while walking Biscuit, I noticed something odd. The turf looked off, not just the color but the texture too. It glistened, melted actually. Turns out Brenda had hired a budget contractor who used low-grade synthetic turf made from recycled plastics, not rated for high temperatures. The result? Her new lawn began to bubble and warp in the sun like a grilled cheese sandwich left on the dashboard. She tried to cover it with beach towels. That only made it worse. The next day, the melted turf started sticking to her shoes. A neighborhood kid ran across it and left behind a shoe print that hardened like a fossil. Eventually, she had to rope it off with caution tape. Her once pristine yard had transformed into a cautionary tale. I couldn't have planned it better if I tried. As I sat on my porch watching the sun set behind the wreckage of Brenda's ambitions, I realized something important. I hadn't just won. I'd survived. I'd endured pettiness, insults, HOA chaos, and water theft. And I came out the other side with my dignity intact, my bill reduced, and a reputation that would go down in neighborhood history. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. Sometimes it was just watching your enemy try to peel melted turf off their driveway with a spatula while muttering under their breath. I poured myself a drink, gave Biscuit a pat on the head, and looked out across my lawn, still green, still real, and entirely mine. Some battles are fought with fists, others with spreadsheets and sprinkler systems. This one was a masterpiece. And every time it rained, just the tiniest hints of pink and purple would rise from the soil, like a reminder, don't mess with the guy next door, especially not when he knows how to rewire your pipes and paint your lawn like a birthday cake.